All right, so we are here in Capernaum. All right, the way you say Capernaum in Hebrew, right, is Kfar Nachum. Kfar is village, and Nachum is like the name of a person, like Naum. Right, so it's the village of Naum. Right, it's a literal translation. What we're looking at over here, right, is a limestone lintel pieces that decorated and adorned the 5th century synagogue that we see standing over there. And you see some really beautiful artistry and masonry work, right? And you see a lot of different symbols, right? Some of them are some of the 7 species of the land of Israel, right? Like we see grapes over there, we see pomegranates, right? We see this, a rosette, which at the time of Jesus, right, was a very, very popular geometric pattern that you see in many designs on ossuaries, which are like bone boxes to collect the bones of the deceased, on mosaic floors, right, and on buildings, right, very beautiful decorative symbols. Now, there are some symbols that you might associate also with, if I were to say the word Judaism, what image pops in your head right away? Star of David, right? So you would, right, so right here we see the Star of David, right? But right next to it we also have the 5-pointed star, right? Which is not necessarily associated with Judaism, right? So why is it that you have these stars, right? The answer is because the Star of David, what we know today as the Star of David, the 6-pointed star, historically was not a Jewish symbol, right? It's not really a Jewish symbol, not until modern times. When we go to Shiloh, right, there is a Byzantine church there. And when I was in the tour guide course, they took us there. We go in the Byzantine church. We see the mosaic floor, and on it is a Star of David. And I'm like, why does the Byzantines have a Star of David? Because I know they didn't really like the Jews very much. And so the answer is because it wasn't. It was a simple geometric pattern used by many different cultures, right, throughout time and history, right? And it was really only adopted by the Jews from around the 16th, 17th century in Europe, starting around the area of Prague, and then spreading out. Right, and today it's a symbol on the Israeli flag, right? But that's not really the eternal Jewish symbol, right? There is adorning here, right? The symbol that up until modern times, right, is the symbol of the Jewish people, symbol of the state of Israel. Anybody want to guess what it is? Wild guess. Not one guess. Olive branch. That's a good guess. Wrong though. What we see over here, come this way. The menorah, right? The 7-branch candelabra. Now, some of you might be familiar with the Hanukkah menorah that has 9 branches, right? But that's not the menorah, right? That's in Hebrew it's called a Chanukiah. In English, just a Hanukkah menorah, right? And that's only for the holiday of Hanukkah, which is a very, very minor holiday on the Jewish calendar in the grand scheme of things. It's really minor. Right, but the 7-branch candelabra, that's what stood in the tabernacle. Right, that's what stood in the tabernacle. That's what stood in the temple. Right, and if you go to Rome and you go to the Arch of Titus, right, triumphal Arch of Titus, who destroys Jerusalem, right, very famously or infamously, depending on your point of view, they have a relief on the arch of Jewish slaves carrying the gold menorah that was in the temple. Right, and they're also carrying the silver trumpets that Josephus tells us that the Levites, right, would stand on the corner of the temple mount and blow their trumpets, letting people know that either Shabbat is coming, or a holiday is about to start, or there's a changing of the guard shift duty, right? And in Jerusalem, hopefully if I remember, I'll try to bring this back into play because it's connected to our story with Peter. On it also, next to it, we see other 2 Jewish symbols used throughout history. We see the incense shovel used by the priests in the temple, and the shofar, right, the ram's horn that would be blown during holidays like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Right, so here we can see the beautiful, masonry work that adorned the synagogue, right, of the city of Capernaum during the Byzantine time period. Let's head over here. We'll take a seat. Okay, so we saw on the way in, right, 2 signs that say Capernaum, right, the town of Jesus. Why is it called the town of Jesus? It's not where he was born, right? That's Bethlehem. It's not where he grew up. That's Nazareth. So how does this become the town of Jesus? Because this was his headquarters of his ministry, right? When he was preaching to the people, right? The only other town or city that is named more often than Capernaum in the Bible, right, is Jerusalem, right? And Jesus performed many of his miracles here in the town of Capernaum, right? He raised from the dead the head of the synagogues, right? The daughter of the head of the synagogue, Jairus, right? He helps the centurion servant here, right? Inside the synagogue, right on Shabbat, he goes inside and he heals the man with the shriveled hand, right? And then the people, well, some of the members of the authorities, chastise him because you're not supposed to heal on Shabbat, right? And he says, if you have a donkey in a hole, you're not going to get him out, help him climb out on Shabbat. And I'll tell you something, today, rabbis, right, in rabbinical Judaism today, in Orthodox Judaism, for medical reasons, for certain medical reasons, you are allowed to break Shabbat, right? It's okay. It's a pikut nefesh, right? For the sanctification of the soul or the life, right? You are allowed to break certain laws, right? If it's life or death issue, there are certain times where you don't, right? But in certain cases like this, a medical issue, right, like this, right? Orthodox Jew is riding in Jerusalem, he gets hit by a car, right, on Shabbat, and he breaks his leg. Is he allowed to ride in the ambulance, right, to the hospital and be set up to electronic equipment? Yes, he is, right? Because it's the health, right, is more important, right? So here Jesus is ahead of his time, right, ahead of the rabbis and the Pharisees, right? Capernaum is in it. Why does he choose Capernaum, right? Of all the places, this is an important town. What we can see from the synagogue from the 5th century. Again, this is 500 years after Jesus, right? But the importance of the town doesn't really diminish. We can tell from the synagogue, right? One, it's limestone, which is not natural to the area, so it was quarried from not nearby, right? Relatively nearby, and they're hewn. They're like very, there's masonry work to it, which means that it's expensive. Right, it was a very expensive synagogue to make, which means that this town was an affluent town, and not a poor one. Let me put it like this: I'm not going to say it was like Caesarea, modern day Caesarea, right? But it was a respectable town, right? The reason why you even have a Roman centurion here, right? You have a Roman centurion. Jesus doesn't even need to be in the town to actually heal somebody, right? The centurion has a servant who's sick, and he sends people to go to Jesus. Right, now, why is the centurion even here? Because this road, right, along the Sea of Galilee goes along the trade routes. Right, remember, the trade routes are one of the reasons why all the empires throughout history, right, the ones that have come and conquered the land, they've done so. It's either on the way to another empire, like Egypt, right, or Egyptians to the Midianites or the Assyrians, right, crossing, getting to another place, and then controlling the land, right? That's why the Romans are here. Right, to collect taxes. And who else, speaking of taxes, who else is here? Right, at the town of Capernaum, his hometown? Matthew. Right, this is the town of Matthew. Right, and Matthew was one of the worst, characters as far as, like, say, how Judean society view him, right? Nobody likes tax collectors. Who likes tax collectors, right? I just read never mind. Matthew, right, he's a tax collector for the Romans, right? And he's also Jewish, so it's like a double betrayal of his people. And this is something I actually kind of took away from the TV show Chosen, where they really make Matthew. I really like how they make him OCD, kind of an interesting character, a fun character. And then like the hatred that Peter has for him, right? Because he's a tax collector, because he's betraying his Jewish people, right, for the Romans, right? And then people chastise him for doing these kinds of things, but he doesn't. Jesus is coming like, right, he's doing it, right, he's here, right, not to preach to the righteous, right, but to get the sinners, right, the people, bring them back into the flock. And also this is when people, they talk about how he goes into the sinners' houses, tax collectors, right, and how could you go into it, like when Peter, right, when he goes to visit Cornelius, right, and he says, that it's really forbidden for me to come inside your house or to, to be with you. Why is this? It's not necessarily a completely anti-social point of view, right? There's a religious reason for it. It's because of that spiritual purity that I talked about, right? Sinners and Gentiles, they're going to be full of contamination, right? Because they don't care about non-kosher animals, right? And they don't go into a mikveh and dip themselves if they happen to be contaminated. So anytime you go into their house or you deal with them, right, you're really risking right, becoming contaminated in turn, and therefore passing that on to other people. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to head into the synagogue. Now take a look at the synagogue, right? And the limestone is from the 5th century, right? But remember what I said at Caesarea, right? Holy sites stay holy. Now, there was a synagogue at the time of Jesus, right? But where is it? We haven't found it per se. What many people believe is that we're going along with the lines of holy sites stay holy, right? The foundation below the limestone, you can see like this basalt foundation, right? This was of the synagogue of the time of Jesus, right? So Jesus' synagogue was not made of limestone. It would have been made, assuming that it was continuation of the same material, right, of basalt, right? But it's built on the same location. It's possible that the synagogue was destroyed during an earthquake. There was a major earthquake in the land in 633, right? And some other ones, maybe, we don't know, maybe they just need it's a few hundred years old and they want to renovate, get something more beautiful, right? But we're going inside, right, the synagogue to learn a little bit about what happens, right, in the time of Jesus. All right, so we're in the synagogue. Now, synagogues at the time of Jesus would have had a similar design, very, very similar design. Basilica style, right? Basilica again is a sort of usually a public building, right? We divide it into 3 sections, right? With the 2 smaller sections on the sides and then the larger one in the middle with columns, almost exclusively always columns, dividing the sections, right? And now how do we know it's a synagogue? We didn't necessarily find a sign that says, Baruch haba lebeit knesset, welcome to the synagogue, right? But the seating arrangements, right? This is a typical seating arrangement, right, in the synagogues at the time of Jesus and then later on, right, through the Byzantine time period. Now, in Hebrew, a synagogue, let me start like this. A synagogue is a Greek word, right? It's a Greek word for the translation of Hebrew, right, Beit Knesset. Now, what was the point of a synagogue? What do Jews do in synagogues today? What do you guess they do? Pray, right? They pray in synagogues, right? But we don't call it a Beit Tfilah, which would literally mean house of prayer, right? It's not a house of prayer. It's not called that, at least, right? Instead, it's called the Beit Knesset. Knesset, right, means gathering, right? What did they do in the synagogues at the time of Jesus? What was the point of it? Because I tell you now, right, the way that we use synagogues today, Jews use synagogues today, is not the same way that they used them 2,000 years ago, right? And we'll talk about this tomorrow when we go to another synagogue. I'll talk about sort of a little bit about evolution of this, if you would like. But what was the point, right, of the synagogues, right, if it wasn't for prayer? Reading the scriptures, exactly. Every time Jesus goes into a synagogue, what's the point of it? Right, to go and teach or to hear, right? 1, to hear, and then 2, also to do teaching. And 3, to do healing, right? So this was the purpose of the synagogues at the time of Jesus, right? They would come, right, at Beit Knesset, like a gathering house, like a community center, right, to a certain degree for our conceptual understanding, right? They might have marriages here, right? They might have, parties or festivals during the holidays, right? But during these during the normal hours, right, it would be a place where the youth, right, or the elders and the men, right, when they're not working, could come and listen to the readings of the scriptures, right, of the Torah, right, of the books of the prophets, right. And so this was the purpose of the synagogues, and it's changed, right, over the course of 2,000 years, right, due to basically the exile. But we'll talk about this maybe later on tomorrow. The synagogues today, right, most of them, at least in America, let's say, they face east. Right? Anybody know what direction synagogues face? I know you're not Jewish, but I'm just curious if any. Right? Most people in America will say east because that's the direction synagogues face, right? East, right? But they don't really face east, right? The direction of prayer, right, is Jerusalem, right? So what direction is this synagogue facing? South, right? So this is where, right, they would be facing. Now you would enter in, by the way, right? This was typical also Roman architectural style, right? Sort of like how how I described the Cenaphron at Caesarea, right? You have 2 smaller gates on either side, and then a larger one coming in the middle. Right now we can see some of the foundation of the and some of the rooms, right, of the synagogue at the time of Jesus, right over here. Right, this separate room over here on this side was an annex. Some people believe it was used for like private study, or it was the room where they would hold, the scrolls, right, in the holy books. Holy scrolls, they didn't really have books, okay? But that was the purpose of this room over here. Any questions or anything? Yes. All Jews believe the Messiah will be human. No, that was the crux, right? That was the thing that the Jews. Two things the Jews found it hard when Jesus was around and immediately after. One, the fact that the Messiah is divine, right, is not in Jewish theology, right? And also, Messiah is supposed to do what he's supposed to do. He's not supposed to die and come back. This is also one of the things, right? And that's interesting how Chabad thinks this, right? Because the Messiah is not supposed to die and come back. He's supposed to do what he's supposed to do. Now, there's a concept. I don't know if I want to go so deep into this, but there is a concept in Judaism of two Messiahs, Messiah ben Yosef and Messiah ben Yehuda, the Messiah son of Joseph and the Messiah son of Judah. And the Messiah son of Joseph is sort of going to lay the groundwork for the Messiah who is going to follow him, who will be like the true Messiah that will bring about, either the salvation, right? So there is this concept, but anyway, it's still not divine, right? And you needs to be stated that this is Messiah ben Yosef, not Messiah ben Yehuda. Some like religious messianic Jews today, they might think that, I don't know, I'm putting words in their mouth and thoughts in their head, but for instance, like maybe Theodor Herzl or David Ben Gurion, right? Theodor Herzl is the founding father of modern political Zionism. He wrote a book that got this whole thing started, why we have a state of Israel, right? And David Ben Gurion was the prime minister, right? So like they're just, one of them, let's say, is Theodor Herzl is Yeshaya ben Yosef. He lays the groundwork for the Messiah, but before the Messiah comes, the Jews return to their homeland. Jews from all over the world, right? Four corners of the earth return, right? We see this now, right? And then, right, we have the 6-day war. Israel has liberated, right, the ancient biblical homeland in 6 days, right? We're going on the right track here, and pretty soon we're going to have the Messiah, right? And that's going to be Messiah ben Yehuda. So, I'm going to talk about sacrifice. Hebrew is a language of root words, where you have 3 letters that will form the base of like 30 or 20 different words, and they're going to have a phonetical similarity and also like a similarity in meanings, right? Like sofer. Sofer is a scribe. Sefer is a book, right? Lispor, lesaper, right, is to explain, right? We're hearing all these sort of phonetical similarities, right? So here, right, to sacrifice, right, we have the kuf, for those that know Hebrew, we have the kuf, the resh, and the bet, okay? And this letter, the bet, can make a B or a V sound, right, because that's going to be important here in a second, right? So to sacrifice is la'akriv, right? The sacrifice, like the animal, right, is called a korban, okay? La'akriv et tahar korban, right? To sacrifice the animal, right? If I want to get close to somebody, like, hey, how you doing? I want to get close to you. Right? I need, okay, lehit karev. Okay, and to be close is karov. Ani karov elecha, ani ohev otcha. I'm close to you, I love you. Right? So these are phonetically similar, right, and meaning similar. The why sacrifice, the way that you get close to God is to sacrifice, right, in the Jewish concept. This is why it is so important, right? Well, that's why the temple was so important, right? Because the way, right, it's very different than how Jews do it now, right? When Jews want to, give thanks to God, or they want to pray, they want to be close to God, they pray. They go to the synagogue and they pray, right? They had synagogues 2,000 years ago in the time of Jesus, but the purpose of them then was not what we do now, right? You don't go to the synagogue to pray to get close to God. You want to get close to God. You want to ask God to forgive, right, for a sin you committed, or give thanks for something you do. What do? You go to the synagogue. You go to the Jerusalem. You go to the temple. You give a korban, right, to sacrifice, la'akriv, so you can get karov to God, so you can get close to God. Right? This was the importance of it. Now, why sacrifice, right? On a psychological level, right? Thousands and thousands of years ago, when prehistoric man decides to begin, quote unquote, religion, right? Why sacrifice? Like, it's a really interesting concept because, right, these are people that lived hand to mouth. Every day was a struggle to survive, right? They have to go and they search the food, hunt the food, not die when they're hunting the food, right? And now raise the animals, right? Keep other animals from harming your animals, right? And you have a choice kid that will give you and your family nutrients, right? Give you energy, and you take this kid and you sacrifice it, right? Up to, right, the sky, an invisible God, right? Why is this? Because it's a contract. It is a belief that you are giving up something in hopes in return that you will get something in return, right? You give up these nutrients of this calf, right? And God will make it rain, so you will have more nutrients with the food, right? With the harvest. This is the importance of sacrifice. It's a contract between you and this other person, or entity, let's say, right? And this is the importance of Jesus' sacrifice because it's a contract. It's almost a reverse contract, actually, because up until now, right, we're the ones doing the sacrificing to God, so we can be close to Him, so He will give us something, right? But Jesus' sacrifice is reversing. God is giving us now something, right? God is giving, right, His only begotten Son, right, to die a very painful death, right, to give us repentance, right, and forgiveness for the sins of all humanity. He gives up this, we get this. And what we need to give to God in return, right, because it's a two-way street, right, is to believe, right, that in Jesus, right, that He is the Messiah, the Son of God, sacrificed, right, died for our sins, was resurrected, and will come back. This is the importance of sacrifice, right, and how it connects, right, in ancient sort of human thought, Jewish thought during the time of the Second Temple, right, and Christian dogma and theology. Any questions? Great question. Why don't you sacrifice anymore? Anybody want to take a guess before I answer the question?
Because there's no temple.
Because there's no temple, right? Hezekiah and later Josiah will solidify sacrifice in Jerusalem, right? Before Hezekiah, remember, there are like high altars all over the place. And by the way, we found them. We found them in Arad. We found them in Beersheba, right? Jews would sacrifice to other gods, but also to the God of Israel, but outside of Jerusalem. And Hezekiah and Josiah want to unify this. And by the time of Jesus, the only place Jews sacrifice is in the temple. And when the temple is destroyed, it's actually a huge crisis for Judaism. And I don't know how much I want to go into it because it's like the history of Judaism and not Christianity, right? But when the temple is destroyed, like Judaism goes through a huge crisis. What do we do? Because the entire religion, cult of Judaism is about sacrificing in the temple, right? And how it evolves, right, is you have a Pharisee, right, by a man named Yochanan ben Zakkai, who escapes out of Jerusalem, right? And he doesn't escape the Romans. He escapes the Jews. He escapes the rebels, right? Because the Jews are fighting amongst themselves. I'll talk about this later, but he escapes out of Jerusalem, and he is, long story short, he's given very good conditions by Titus, right? And he asks to establish an academy at a place called Yavne, which is just south of Tel Aviv, right? Now Tel Aviv. And from these sages, these Torah scholars, grows rabbinical Judaism, right? And they needed to come up with what do we do now, right? And they basically replace sacrifice with prayer. Right now, when Jews go to a synagogue, right, there is like a set liturgy of what we need to say, right, and how we need to say it, right? All of this was determined over a series of centuries, but it starts in the 2nd century in Yavne, and even in like the Shabbat services, like the Musaf, you list off the sacrifices that would happen if the temple were standing today. So you are vicariously sacrificing, right, by listing the sacrifices in the temple. It's still important, by the way, right? If the third temple, right, gets built, the Jews would, in theory, go back to sacrificing animals, right? Some people say this. Other Jewish sages, like one of the greatest ones, Rambam, says no. they're not going to do that because we don't need to do that. The whole point of sacrificing is because it's something that psychologically the Jews needed to wrap their heads around. Right? It's not necessary. God doesn't need it. God let us do it because this is what the Israelites would have accepted. Right? Because if God takes them out of Egypt and he says, okay guys, just, pray to me, believe in me, no sacrifices, and the Israelites probably be like, what are you talking about? Of course we got to sacrifice to you. Everybody else in the world is sacrificing to their gods. We're going to do the same thing. If I feel this is not right. So the same reason why they wanted a king, right? Everybody else has a king. Why don't we have a king? Right? And now that we've had centuries and centuries of not sacrificing, Jews are psychologically possible, we can wrap our heads around worshiping God without sacrifice. And so the Rambam says when the third temple will be rebuilt, we're not going to need to sacrifice anymore because we're past that point psychologically where we need to. Right? Any questions? Any other questions? Great questions, guys, by the way. All right, let's head out this way. All right, so the synagogue is from the 4th, 5th century. Right, but looking out over here, right, all of these buildings, all of these foundations of buildings are from the 1st century, right? So these are the houses and the walls, right, that were standing during the time of Jesus, right? And this is not one large house, right? These are actually multiple houses, sort of sometimes sharing a wall, right? And you can just, you can see, the lip for the door to catch the wooden door over here, right? You can really sort of make out how the house structure worked. You can just imagine, right, these, the houses being complete and thatched roofs on top of it, right, and Jesus being maybe in one of these rooms and the crowds of people, right, are gathering to be healed by him, and you have the story of the paralytic man, right, who wants to be healed, right, and his friends want to help him, but the crowds are just completely inundating the area of Jesus, and so they carry the man over the roofs, they knock out the thatched roofs, right, make a hole, right, and lower him down, right, possibly into one of these rooms, right, so Jesus would have walked, right, and healed, right, throughout this area. Now we see these sort of Stonehenge kind of looking structures. These are called Chorazin windows. What we believe they were used for was for the animals. Right? If you are a goat herder or whatever, you don't leave your goats out in the field, right? Unless you have somebody sleeping out with them, because you got to make sure that they're not going to be eaten by wolves or any other, predatory animals, and of course, being stolen by a man, right? So you bring him into the house, but you don't want them necessarily wandering all over the place. And so you have like this sort of separated room, and the goats or sheep, whatever, would enter into the room right through the windows. Right? That's the purpose of them. And those are very common at the time of the Byzantine time period. Sorry. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to walk this way. Please be careful of the stair, right? Of the stairs here, it can be very steep. And we're going to head over to the Church of St. Peter. Okay, so the modern church that we see above us, right, is built over the ruins, right, of Byzantine churches. It's actually multiple Byzantine churches sort of constructed one after another, sort of adding on to the original structure here. Now this, in the center, what this church is centered around, right, is a 1st century room, right? We can see just sort of two small pieces of the wall, right, on either side of this room, right? And you can see the Byzantine church sort of encompassing, right, this structure. This is the room where, according to tradition, that Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law. Right? Now, academics and historians who naturally are, try to be objective and they don't use the Bible as a reference necessarily, or at least a complete authority, they will actually even lend a credence and authority, right, to the fact that Jesus most likely would have been in this room and performed, a miracle of some sort, or at least the people believed he performed a miracle, but it would have been in this room. Why is that? Because if you look on, right, the rooms, the stones are basalt, right, so they're black, right? But you look over here, okay, you don't see black, you see white, right? That white is plaster. Remember how I said in Caesarea, right, you don't want to look at the natural stone of your building, right? It's very ugly, you plaster it over, right? And if you have money, right, you dye the plaster and you make it a fresco and you make it very colorful. So this is the only room that they found in all of the excavations here, where over the course of 300 years, they plastered and replastered this room 7 times. Right? So they took very, very, very good care of this room. Now, why would they do that? right? So the fact that they have a church around the rooms gives us an answer, right? Because for the 300 years where this room was plastered over and over again, right, it was illegal to be a Christian. Remember I said at Megiddo, right, you don't build a church, right, during this time period, because as soon as you show up on Sunday, Roman soldiers are gonna be there and arrest you, right? So Christians, they would need to meet in secret. They would meet in these house churches, right? And so this was a room, right, that was used as a house church, right, during the time of Christian persecution. And then when Constantine legalizes Christianity, right, they say, well, where are we going to build a church? Right, well, how about we do it over the exact site we've been using as our church, because here, this is where Jesus performed the miracle, right, and healed Peter's mother-in-law, right? So they incorporated, right, the older first century church, right, into the structure, right, of the Byzantine church. Right, now the Byzantine church was destroyed in 614, along with almost every church in the land of Israel, when the Persians invaded and took over, right, from the Byzantines for a period of around 14 years or so, right? And the town of Capernaum never actually recovers from this, right? They return, they build a little bit over here. That's why the Greek Orthodox Church is on the other side over there of that wall, because they returned and tried to reincorporate Capernaum, right? But in 750, there was a massive earthquake that destroyed many of the, not just villages in the area, but huge towns, like Beit She'an, we're going to see tomorrow. Not tomorrow, a few days' time, right? And other Decapolis cities in Jordan were all destroyed, right? And so once this was done, right, and also the fact that the government was now based out of Baghdad, so this area is not as important to them as it was to the previous Muslim rulers who were based out of Damascus, which is closer. And so Capernaum goes the way that Jesus prophesied, just like Chorazin and Bethsaida, right? Because they rejected, right, Jesus' teaching, right, the towns are going to be destroyed. It took a few centuries, but we're on a different time. Jesus is on a different time scale. Right, and so, but eventually, right, the town was destroyed and never rebuilt. Right, once it's abandoned by 750, right, nobody ever comes back and tries to reestablish Capernaum. We can go inside the church. You can actually look from above. There are like glass planes on the floor, and you can see the ancient structures from above.